Welcome to the second in our series of 5 podcasts for National Work-Life Week 2013. Join me, Liz Morris, as I explore in these 5 podcasts, with the input of 5 leading experts, the possibility of having it all. A full life with a good sense of life balance, high performance at work and well-being. With the full-on demands of life, is this really possible to achieve, or do we need to sacrifice at least one aspect to be able to achieve another? Joining me throughout this series of podcasts in the studio are Averil Leimon, internationally renowned executive coach and author, Professor Cary Cooper, CBE, Pro Vice-Chancellor for External Relations and Distinguished Professor of Organisational Psychology and Health at Lancaster University Management School, Chair of the Academy of Social Sciences, President of Relate, and immediate past President of the British Association of Counselling and Psychotherapy. Also, we have Ben Warnsborough-Jones, a Special Forces soldier in the British Army, now combining this work, as a reservist, with supporting civilian leaders to build highly effective teams. And via audio conference joining us is Suzanne Jacobs, lead researcher on our most recently published paper exploring human intrinsic motivation and the impact of trust on performance and well-being, and John Dent, physical trainer and nutritionist to elite sportsmen and women and senior executives. In our first podcast, we explored the relationship between performance, balance and well-being, and what it is that really motivates us. We learned from our panel of experts how to identify what it is that's really important to us, our core needs and values, and how, when these are not being met, our performance suffers, as well as our well-being and our ability to have a full and balanced life. In today's podcast, we explore whose balance is it anyway? Is it possible to direct your internal dialogue, your self-talk, and your actions in a way that builds a full and balanced life? Does this choice really exist? Averil, can you share an example of how easy it is to get into unproductive and unhealthy ways of working, and if it's possible to proactively break a potentially vicious circle?
We've got something like 100 waking hours. You're not getting any more. It's 100. How are you disposing of them? And one of the first challenges I would always look at with people is what they're doing at work. Because we do have an awful lot of habits of staying late. And I've certainly been in organisations where I've watched what's actually happening during the day. And people are busy, but time gets wasted. And suddenly there's this need early evening to catch up with everything. And it becomes a tradition that everybody does that. And I think looking at effective ways of working, personally effective ways of working, is a first start. You then have to deal with your own beliefs about that, and also what you project as other people's beliefs about it. If I go early, they'll think this or that. Well, we don't know what they'll actually think. I was dealing with a head of risk who used to text his people at 4 a.m, and they would have Blackberries they couldn't switch off, and if you tried to hide it somewhere, it vibrated as badly as a tumble dryer. So you'd be lying rigid, pretending you weren't hearing it. It was easier to get up and respond. And when I asked him about this, he said, I leave work at 6:30 every evening. I go to the opera. It suits me to start work early and just do things as I think about them. I'm not expecting anybody to respond at that time. But he'd not communicated that. So a lot of beliefs build up about what we have to do, what we ought to do, what we're expected to do, and we don't challenge it, and we don't actually do the time and motions and say, well, do you know what? I do my best work in the morning, and I'm not going to do my best work at 7 o'clock in the evening, especially if there are people at home I'd quite like to be seeing. So how do I handle that in a constructive way that proves that I am an effective member of the team, but I'm not just going to hang around here?
Back in our first podcast, we heard from Suzanne Jacobs, who shared that even though most of the threats in everyday life are not physical, neurologically our brains still interpret and respond to them as if they were threats to our very survival. Is it really possible to train your thoughts and behaviours even when the threat to survival is very real? Ben, as a professional soldier, how do you cope with your self-talk when under fire? Is it possible to train your thoughts and actions so that you're able to think rationally and act in a way that means you can achieve your objectives and ensure survival as best possible for you and your colleagues? Do you feel fear?
Yes, absolutely, 100%. And this is a kind of, I suppose, a standard answer, really, that the military drills a lot into you. And the reason you do that is because in those situations, you don't have to think about what you're trying to do. You switch off some of the voices that go on upstairs, and you're starting to work and do the things that you've been trained to do, what it is that you've almost been programmed to do. It is the confidence. It's the rehearsing things. Or having a process, I suppose. The first is learning a new skill. Once you've all been told that skill, it's then learning how to do it, applying the skill, and at each level you're turning up the pressure. And specifically within the military, you look at the process that you go through. Once you've got that in a warm, comfortable environment, you'll then start upping the pressure, upping the pressure again. And you start to... It is this programming process where you all of a sudden you're not thinking about it, you're doing it. You understand what you need to achieve and you just start going into that zone.
When you first started training, what were the things going through your head?
Well, it's normally excitement. So boys and toys. You've got all the guns, the cars, the limits being taken away. Helicopters, aeroplanes. All of these exciting things that happen. So it's a lot more adrenaline fueled.
When did you start to realise that you needed to turn down, as it were, the adrenaline and focus on a more perhaps measured approach?
So I think there's a big emotional and mental process followed by apprehension. Every job was very different for the jobs that I've done. So apprehension about the job, leading to a transition from the place that you're in, to a lot of the time for myself it would be going then and starting a pre-deployment package. So going into a different type of training. So at each stage you've got apprehension followed by, okay, I'm here at this stage, and a bit of relief followed by the apprehension, but each time going like you're climbing up a mountain and then you get to a plateau. And then here you go again, and you can never quite see the top, so you get small moments of relief. The difference, I suppose, with the military compared to a lot of other things is that once you're on a path and you're going overseas, that's it. There's no sick note, there's no, actually I don't feel like this anymore, or I've had a change of heart. You're committed to that job. Full stop.
Did you ever catch yourself thinking, well, I'd just like to go home now?
Every single minute of that journey. But if I did this, then perhaps like that. These are the voices that are going on in the head at the time. And it took me on my last tour approximately 3 to 5 days to actually get to the actual place that I was due to be. So my head was telling me that the logical part of my brain was saying, but if this could happen, then maybe you could go home. And I maybe that's not right, but certainly that's a sane part of me not wanting to be going where we were going.
How did you learn to direct your internal dialogue so that it supported the situation you found yourself in?
I think I accepted at various stages I had no control over this situation. Mm-hmm. I don't have a choice. Mm-hmm. So I can either mull on it or get on with it and start making decisions or other inner dialogues about other things. But don't forget, especially in a journey that's that long to get to where you're going to, you have a lot of time waiting for going into potentially the unknown.
So you chose what attitude to have consciously?
Yeah, on the whole, yeah.
Did you know you were going to go through this?
Well, yes and no. Not the first time you do it. But again, for me, the circumstances were very different for different deployments. So, certainly in the last one, I was still very apprehensive about things. Yeah.
What did you find the toughest times mentally and emotionally?
I think some of the hard things for me were not necessarily in those situations where there's a very high level of intensity. So you're in a contact and something's happening to you. That's almost easier to deal with than some of the times I was working in a safe house, for example, and I was on my own in a place where there weren't really any other supporting forces, and I was managing or controlling a group of guys who were out on the ground, and there are big pauses and all kinds of things that are happening where your mind then goes into a state of you don't know what's happening, you don't know what's there on the ground happening with those guys. They may be a short burst of communication about something that's gone wrong, and then a pause. And you've got to think about, okay, so if this has happened, then I may need to do this action or that, and you just, it's the whole thing's unfolding in front of you, and you've got to keep making decisions about what you're going to do. So do I need to escalate this? Do I need to call for support? And that support may be in a country very, very far away, and the implication of doing that would be perhaps a political impact, versus the implication of not doing anything could mean that you've got 4 guys out on the ground who are completely cut off and completely on their own, and they're in a contact, so people are shooting them.
So, given that situation, how did you remain rational and stop your mind running away with the many different scenarios that could be happening?
In this specific example, I had developed a number of processes, a number of what-if situations which I'd actually drawn out, and my process was to go through it and pick up my various what-if folders and just a remise of those scenarios. I'd done some flowcharts, for example, as funny as it sounds, and the process of taking that out and going through that process, that flow, what helped put me in a place which was, if that happens, I'm prepared for this.
Yes.
And being prepared makes me feel okay. When you are staring at a kind of open ocean, it's very daunting. But if in that space you start seeing options, then the ocean doesn't seem as big anymore. So by having those little bits of planning there available, what I was enabling myself to do was be better prepared for the things that I hadn't planned for. Because my mind was engaged, it was ready, it's in that stage, you're prepared for it. You know that it's a challenge, it's just a new thing that you need to deal with, so I work through and deal with it.
What about when you are potentially just about to make that contact? How do you cope with the huge adrenaline surge that could cloud your judgment and could potentially be life-threatening?
I think the adrenaline's obviously always there, especially when you are just approaching an area that you're going to be breaching into. So you're right, there is a process for trying to slow yourself down a little bit. There is a natural tendency to charge, and whereas actually if you slow down and you just move through things at a methodical pace, it's just a lot smoother and a lot more efficient. It's there's more pushing you, there's more adrenaline, there's more that makes an urgency that makes you want to run into things. And clearly there are times where you do have to move exceptionally fast, but it's having the judgment of being able to know when you've got to do that versus when you've actually, despite everything wanting you to push forward, just draw yourself back in and go back to that process. Slow is smooth and smooth is fast.
Ben, you've shared with us a very real life example of how preparation and training of both your behaviours and your thought patterns builds capability when preparing for or in a contact situation, and also how in the moment you need to be aware of and use your internal dialogue to calm your mind and enable you to think rationally so that you're able to see potential options, even if the situation is outside of your experience or your current plan. Thank you. Cary, bringing this back into the workplace, it's sometimes tough because, of course, this means that we each as individuals need to take responsibility, not only for our internal dialogue, but also for the work environment as a whole.
It really is important for all of us to be responsible for the workplace. You know, we don't just leave it up to managers. And coming up with solutions, I think, is the critical dimension. We have fewer people in the work environment. Line managers have a lot heavier workloads than they used to have. The last thing in the world they need is for you to come and whinge and just complain without a solution. Come with a solution and take responsibility. The work environment is about the psychological contract. It's about, at every level, you have a psychological contract with your line manager, you have one with your colleagues, you have one with your own subordinates, about, this is what I'm going to do. This is what a contract is. Both people have to benefit from it. And it really holds sway in the area of work-life balance.
So we've learnt about the power of our internal dialogue, that we can train our thoughts to build future capability in both given scenarios and to build the confidence and adaptability to cope with the unexpected, and that we can become aware of and redirect our own internal dialogue actually in the moment as well. When working with clients, we often start to build new positive thought processes with a small but incredibly powerful exercise that starts to create a positive frame, enabling you to see more options and have the confidence to explore them. The exercise is simply to notice just 5 good things each day just before going to sleep. It doesn't matter how small they are. A cup of coffee at just the right temperature, your train arriving on time, a smile. Just notice 5 good things as you reflect on your day, and this will start to build a new positive thought habit that will enable you to start to see more options and more solutions. The other exercise that we often share in order to help deal with lack of balance and negative emotions in the moment is a process of cognitive reappraisal. It helps you to get back in control of your internal dialogue and re-engage a rational thought process. So as soon as you become aware of a shift in your mood, perhaps a peak in your adrenaline, just as Ben was describing, slow things down and use a process to work through the situation methodically to build a solution. Mentally label the emotion that you're feeling, then take a look at the situation. What do you really see? What are you assuming? And what do you just not know? Then ask yourself, what outcome do I want from this situation? What is my goal? Then seek to identify the options and proactively choose how to act, then act. Averil, what do you find is a really useful first step?
And I would always suggest that people do behavioural experiments. Oh, well, I couldn't possibly do that. They'll say, I couldn't possibly go early one night. Well, let's test it. Set a night, discuss it with your team, and see what happens. And what's interesting, of course, is that you begin to realise that they love doing this and they love being in control, and they're perhaps over-managing. And when their team goes, no, go, they feel a bit lost because they like that sense of being needed. The risk that I see with many people working is that they go home so late that the people that they chose to live with, actually it's very hard for them to sustain a relationship of any real depth or intimacy with them, because by the time everybody's together, A, they're competing about how busy their day's been, and B, they're too tired to bother having any, clear communication. So it's actually much easier to just stay at work because those people get you. So it's habits like that if you can face up and be honest and you see it laid out, it's a big challenge. But the first step is doing something different today in the process that you suggested, but carrying out that behavioural experiment to see what happens. And time again I've had people saying, I went in the next day so refreshed, I powered through the work. Whereas I've had other people saying, no, I worked all night, and then the next day I went in the morning and I redid it all because it was only a first draft. And you think, well, if you'd gone in fresh in the morning, that first draft might have been the right draft.
What will you do? What is the first step that you will take in order to be able to take back the choice and focus the power of your internal dialogue? In our next podcast, John Dent, physical trainer and nutritionist to elite sportsmen and women and senior executives, is joining me to take a look at how we can work with our physical brains and our bodies to maximise performance. Until next time, from me, Liz Morris, and with huge thanks to our panel of experts and our sponsors Santander, until next time, goodbye.